feels like Nintendo's forgotten about the GameCube. With rare exception, games like Super Mario Sunshine, Pikmin, or some Zeldas, just about the entire GameCube library is stuck on that console. The fact that there's no legit modern way for me to play F-Zero GX or Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door feels like a huge missed opportunity. But those three are exclusives that are remembered fondly and are definitely noted by audiences. Because of how popular this thing is with collectors, anytime I, or probably some of you, walk into a retro gaming shop, they've barely got anything. Maybe a few licensed Delios, a few Maddens. You don't really get to see the scope of just how many strange exclusives there actually were. Video games that are absolutely forgotten in 2022. With this thing being over 20 years old now, I'm sure the amount of young people out there that know what an Odama is hovers in the double digits. It doesn't help that you needed a GameCube microphone to even play it. Plug that thing right into the memory card slot and be amazed that this works and was a thing. It's bizarro world. It's become pretty difficult to have a sense of self-discovery with older games and the scarcity and price gouging on retro. These days, if you want to know about oddities from the 2000s, you have to listen to a weird guy on the internet who definitely used to wear shark tooth necklaces and flame shirts. Today is no different. So yo, it's Austin, and it's time to pull out your Wavebird, sit on the toilet, and play some forgotten GameCube games. Truly an ad that would foreshadow the future with the Switch. I've gone and put together a big list of things to talk about today, and we're gonna be here a while. But first, this video's been brought to you by Hero Wars. Halloween is coming. I'm gonna be dressed up like a superhero vigilante, which is the most normie thing ever, but it's also time to install and play some Hero Wars, a mobile action RPG. For Halloween, a portal to the Dominion has opened, and they need your help. They need 10,000 installs by October 31st to open this thing, and there's prizes being given away like Amazon gift cards. It's open to any non-registered user from the United States aged 18 or older. There's no purchase necessary, you just gotta click down below to download and join the fight. But it's not just about the prizes, you also get the Crown Jewel, an action RPG for your cell phones with lots of PvP modes. In Hero Wars, you get to explore the lands of the Dominion while collecting different heroes, each with cool abilities. They can be combined in different ways to tackle missions, giving you chests with loot and items. Not to mention, if you like looking at huge RPG numbers, this is the game for you. Hero Wars has over 100 million registered players around the world, meaning you probably already have a few friends already in the mix, so you can help them out and start a guild to tackle enemies with your buds. So come ye on this hallowed eve so we can open the portal to the Dominion together. Click the special link in the description, download the game before the 31st, and get a chance to win some amazing prizes. Check out Hero Wars today, and thanks for the sponsor. But for now, we're going back to the forgotten GameCube titles, and we might as well start with the absurd. I may not wear a puka shell necklace anymore, but give me a flame shirt any day, and I'll look like half the cast of Bloody Roar Primal Fury. Oh man, Bloody Roar. The GameCube may not exactly be known for it, but it has a ridiculous amount of fighting games, some of which I have extremely fond memories of. Even if that GameCube controller D-pad is less than ideal, you know, I'd be mashing out combos in Capcom vs SNK 2 and Soul Calibur 2, or putting up with Marvel Nemesis, thinking it was fun because my brain was too small to comprehend. But only Hudson's Bloody Roar Primal Fury allowed you to fight like an animal, which we all did with anime cutscenes. Technically, this is also on the original Xbox as Bloody Roar Extreme, which is a slightly updated version with another character, but also one where they redid the opening anime cinematic scene by scene with much worse looking in-game visuals. Why? Back in the day when you bought one of these Japanese games, you were craving the anime opening. It was a staple. But now instead of watching the cool flame shirt man Yugo sleeves rip and tear frame by frame, we get this. A weird choice. This doesn't really matter, but the GameCube one is all intact and is a really fun game too. You pick one of several characters, each of which are zoanthropes, people who are half human, half animal. You quite literally embrace your persona and can do that on the fly while beating the snot out of everyone in sight. I played the originals mostly growing up, specifically the second on the PlayStation 1, and I loved it. Each character has a memorable look in both forms, and pulling off combos between them is really satisfying. I'm just saying, there's not many things that are scarier than someone turning into a human-sized rabbit and juggling you. The GameCube is no stranger to games that fall into the absurd. You've got something like Tube Slider, a futuristic racing game, one that actually came out in the same year as F-Zero GX, one developed by Indie Cube, a group who previously worked on an F-Zero game for the Game Boy Advance that is now mostly owned by Nintendo. These days they mostly make Mario Party, which makes sense because they're an ex-Hudson dev, but in 2003 we had Tube Slider. This was originally pitched as an F-Zero title, but ended up becoming Tube Slider, which is not a great name, but it is fun. It's one of these, you know the deal, extreme G, wipeout kind of things. Gravity, have a weird space car, go fast. Slider was a US only release that might have been a bit too little too late. Cause while neat, it felt like an imitation. That's the genre I'm a total sucker for, by the way, space cars. But with Sega's F-Zero GX, the actual pinnacle of all futuristic racing games, probably my favorite GameCube release and something so good they can't even top it just around the corner. Yeah, I get it. Anyone remember Mystic Heroes? I don't. There's a lot to unpack here. It's a sequel to a bunch of games we didn't get. All of that shared the same name of an anime that seems to be completely unrelated. It's like fine. I know this is entirely wrong, but I always viewed it on the outside as Dynasty Warriors for kids. The Scooby-Dooification. Is that wrong? Absolutely. There's plenty that we could get into, but some of the strangest also happen to be some of the most expensive, which I guess makes sense because I can't see many kids sitting there begging their parents for a copy of Go-Go Hyper Grind. Looking at? You might be asking yourself in the year 2022. The answer is a collaboration between a Japanese game studio and American animation group Spoomco, who worked on Ren and Stimpy. Go-Go Hyper Grind was published by Atlas of all companies, and the developer, Opanchi, is only known for this. A great sign. Imagine, if you will, skateboarding, but with old school American cartoon violence. You could do ollies, do lip tricks and whatnot, but you better combo that into a lighting yourself on fire or a swift flattening. I actually love the concept of combining skateboarding with environmental hazards as a gameplay mechanic, and they pull it off well enough. The art style is extremely standout, and all the characters have a distinct look to them. They have unique combos and movesets that are visually different and goofy to look at, and if you're playing as Piggy Sue, you better be ready for a screen full of a lot of meat. Listen, all I'm saying is that Crystal Star Fox walked, so Penny Go-Go Hyper Grind could run, then get impaled. What is going on? They knew what they were doing. Imagine buying this for your kids, turning the corner, and seeing a giant fake milk advertisement with a woman donning quite literally slapsticks. Okay, it's October.
Yabos? Max likes her yabos.
This is clearly not for the kids. Putting a niche Japanese skateboarding game together with a slapstick, gross-out American cartoon company was a choice, but it was one that they did decide to go all out with. There's a lot of effort in the presentation that is certainly primed for someone, but it's just when you start playing the thing that it totally falls apart. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, this is not. The boarding feels like an afterthought at times. It's incredibly easy to keep yourself going, but not in like a fun or challenging way. More of a, yeah, I guess I'm doing it. I do, however, like the concept of the combo police coming for you if you've gone over the time limit. Go-Go Hyper Grind was practically forgotten at release with its lower view scores, a lack of any major marketing besides a magazine ad and a small batch of prints. Price Charting has this complete in box for over $500, which, by the way, will net you a PlayStation 5, and that's a much better choice. Better yet, if you're ever thinking about buying a copy of Hyper Grind, just donate it to charity. Considering the unknown status of the developer and the inclusion of Spoomco, I think Go-Go Hyper Grind is gonna remain forever forgotten, but that might be okay. Thankfully for those curious, we've got emulation. Let's move on to the first party, Nintendo themselves. When you think of first party video games on the GameCube, what do you think of? Luigi's Mansion, Mario Party, Wind Waker. For every system selling Super Smash Bros. Melee or Metroid Prime, they had something they refused to release in the States, like Doshin the Giant. I don't know why. He's real cute. There's a lot of these games that Nintendo neglected to localize in the States that by all means could have been cult hits. While we did get Chibi Robo, something like Gift PS sits there with me barely understanding what the heck it is. It's got an unfinished English translation patch, but this thing was apparently held back due to NOA deeming it too weird to bring over. But that's no excuse for Kururin Squash. This whole franchise is totally unknown in the States, and even the original Game Boy Advance version, Kururin, only made it to PAL regions. Concept is real simple, you're a spinning paddle, kind of like a helicopter. Go from point A to B without touching the wall, and you're done. So basic, but so good. You might only recognize this thing as an assist trophy in Smash Brothers, which is valid, but check it out if you can. You don't even need a translation, it's all so simply put together that you can go through it without anything. Oh, also, it jams. Nintendo was really leaning into franchises and familiar concepts during the GameCube days, and I don't blame them. The plumber guy makes the big bucks, and something like Pikmin was gonna be a risk. But they did have a handful of non-Marios. Custom Robo was a big one, and this series is funky because it's been kept mostly Japan side. This will be the first one to escape, and I played it a ton as a kid. I mean, who wouldn't? It was like the kids' version of Armored Core, with a little less 2000s mecha and a little more angelic layer. You gotta love the 4-player battle arena setting, even if the story and art are questionable. I like this one though, this one can stay. It's not often that Nintendo makes RPGs or games like this, but unfortunately it'd be one of the last times because the series disappeared after a DS sequel. But it's definitely a fun cult classic, not so much forgotten. Speaking of, what happened to Wario? This dude's like the king of underappreciated gems on portable consoles. Wario Land 4. Mwah. It seems like Nintendo's banished him to the wacky WarioWare mines these days, releasing a fun, meme-worthy game every 3 to 4 years, but I always preferred his platformers, especially when you put Treasure on it. Wario World on the GameCube was so good. I'm of the mindset that Treasure could do no wrong, and even though it seems like they may not be around anymore, they've made some absolute bangers. Wario World is one of those. I think it might have gotten a little slapped around in the reviews on release due to its short length, but World's platforming was solid. The larger scaled Mario Sunshine came out a year prior, so it was cool to see something scaled back like this, and at this point, a bit more classic. The big difference is that Wario focuses on combat. You're gonna be punching dudes, charging through them, spinning them around, and doing Wario things on your quest to get, well, treasure. It's like a PS1 era platformer, but beefed up on the next generation with clean 60 FPS gameplay, a banging soundtrack, and everything you could want from one of these. Sure, it's not gonna change your life, but like every other Treasure game, it's here for a good time, not a long one. Why Nintendo decided to not team up with them again is a weird decision, but when they hit the gold mine with the WarioWare games, I guess that makes sense. Speaking of, WarioWare Mega Party Games is fantastic. It's hardly forgotten in comparison to World, but a 4-player version of that concept owns. There's one minigame called Listen to the Doctor that's great for parties or awkward Discord calls. JRPGs. The GameCube had them, and I loved them, especially since the entire genre kind of went into cryostasis during the Nintendo 64. You want to play Quest 64? Yeah, I thought so. Huge fan of numbers here. I love watching them go up as my character stands motionless until I tell them what to do, but that's always great when it's accompanied with a great aesthetic and story. There's really something for everyone. I think the biggest that comes to mind is Tales of Symphonia, a landmark Tales of title that continues to get ports. This console also somehow got enhanced versions of multiple Dreamcast staples. There's Evolution Worlds, which is a compilation of 2 old school but decent dungeon crawlers, Skies of Arcadia Legends, which is the definitive version of the second best JRPG on the console, the first being Grandia 2, of course. Kind of adjacent to that, we'd also get not just Phantasy Star 1 and 2 as a compilation, but a unique Episode 3 as a card game RPG. It wasn't really my cup of tea growing up, but I appreciate what it was trying to do. Although, give me a GameCube keyboard controller and slap in a copy of Phantasy Star Online any day. I have no idea why, but RPGs and deck building card games seem to go hand in hand on the GameCube. Not just with Phantasy Star Online Episode 3, but also the Baten Kaitos duology. Developed by Monolith and Tricrescendo, the former of which would go on to make the Xeno series, Baten Kaitos is one of the prettiest games on the freaking console. Yeah, the backgrounds are pre-rendered, but holy moly does it feel cozy. Top that with a soundtrack by Motoi Sakuraba, and you've got yourself something that feels like the best version of a long gone type of game. And the kicker here is that instead of handling combat with a normal attack and defend option, you've got a deck of cards assigned to each character that you have to manage. You may not have the option to attack properly depending on your luck, so you have to play it by ear. Can you accidentally heal your enemy and mess everything up? Yeah, there's a limited amount of time to use a defensive card as well, so it keeps you on your toes, which was very unlike every other JRPG at the time. This and its sequel, Baten Kaitos Origins, were received very well, and a rare, unique, exclusive JRPG on a console that frankly lacked them. Though the very 2000s main character designs can be a little off-putting. Both of these are relatively similar in structure, but fun experiences. But that's not all. For some reason, there's 2 sets of console-exclusive deck-building JRPGs with 2 separate games on the GameCube. But this one was made by the developers of Dark Souls, From Software's Rune series. series, or as they're known overseas, Lost Kingdoms 1 and 2. Although there's a notable dip in quality. I actually like the combat system of Lost Kingdoms a bit more. Rather than having a turn-based system, Lost Kingdoms 1 and 2 have you consuming cards in order to attack people directly. You've got attacks, healing, supports, and even minions that you can throw down. Cards can level up to become stronger and fuse to create something more powerful, and it feels good to find and create new attacks. You might be wondering why I'm talking about both games at the same time, and that's because with the exception of the camera angle and a few small improvements, they're very similar. There's even a few reoccurring characters. In both games, you play as a badass heroine, Katya in 1 and Tara in 2. They both have a funky outfit that exposes their midsection, and they both do what Seto Kaiba wishes he could do in his space station: turn tiny little cards into giant magical beasts. Unfortunately, the story and setting are pretty bland. They're very linear. It seems like the publisher, Activision, knew it was a tough sell at the time too, because with the sequel, they included a free memory card to try and offset the cost to the customer, which is plain as day. And it doesn't help that at the time, RPG players wanted games to be like 40,000 hours long, and both of these were on the much shorter side. Lost Kingdoms 1 can be beaten in less than 10 hours, which is a death sentence for this genre when you consider Bait and Kados as more traditional, as in like 60 hours long. Even if most of that are just really long battles, but hey, that's what we wanted back then for some reason. Nowadays, we don't really care about game length as much, and because of that, I look at Lost Kingdoms 1 and 2 pretty fondly. But I think that time has forgotten all four of these incredibly underrated titles. It's a shame. All four are pretty likely to get stuck on the GameCube forever. It's not just me, right? It's bizarre that this console had so many RPGs with a reliance on cards. You know what? I'm gonna blame Triple Triad for being awesome. Is that wrong? Probably, but you should play all of these. Gotta love Dolphin. Now I think we should focus on a single publisher, and that one being Capcom. It's always fun to look back at a publisher's legacy on a single console, and there's not many more prolific on the GameCube than Capcom. I got 2 words for you: Capcom 5. For those under the age of 27 who probably have no idea, the Capcom 5 were a bunch of games that Capcom announced with the intention of being GameCube exclusives. Similar to how Sega partnered with the Xbox pretty hard, Capcom was going to try to do it to boost those hardware sales after a slow start, and honestly, there wasn't a better company to do it with. Except maybe Square, but yeah. Anyways, the Capcom 5 became the Capcom 4 when Dead Phoenix was canceled, leaving us with Beautiful Joe, Killer 7, Resident Evil 4, and PN03. A solid lineup for sure, but now that most of those have been ported, it's more like the Capcom 1, that one being PN03. Despite having Shinji Mikami of Resi fame as lead director, PN03 got middle-of-the-road reviews, sold poorly, and is, of course, portless. Which is a shame, because it's not that bad. By looking at this gameplay, I'm sure you can immediately see this game's shtick, and that's main character Vanessa Z. Schneider. That's the appeal. Short-haired girl in glasses dancing while shooting lasers. Booty. Booty wiggle. Yep, a lot of people seem to think that this is kind of a spiritual predecessor to Bayonetta, but this whole game screams something closer to Vanquish, and it turns out I was right. Mikami-san just wanted a stylish shooter, and I can see what they were trying to do. It's just, unfortunately, really low on substance, less than 2 hours long, and lacks any variety whatsoever. 80% of this game is a white hallway with level segments that last a minute or two. At least when you beat the game, you get a video of Vanessa dancing? Doing Sentai poses? I'm not sure. I like it though, game's alright. The rest of Capcom's Cube output looks a little like you would expect. Resident Evil and Mega Man's everywhere. There's Mega Man Network Transmission, which is an absurd spin-off that gets little recognition. It takes the Battle Network universe and once again, cards, we can't seem to escape cards today, and fuses that into the platformer genre to mixed results. Aesthetically and mechanically, it's solid. I love the idea of Battle Network through and through, but transmission is hard. Like, considerably more difficult than you would expect. It's bizarre to me that critics were complaining about this game's length back in the day, calling a 10-hour Mega Man a bit on the short side. Oh, how times change. But I'm wanting to focus on a different robot, or rather, a bunch of different robots. Easily Capcom's most absurd and forgotten title on the GameCube has to be Gotcha Force, and I'm lucky enough to have a copy of it. This was actually sent to me by a follower of the channel who didn't write their name on the stuff, so if this was you, send me a message. Thank you very much. Gacha Force is really cool. It's definitely my favorite game involving robots on the GameCube, although these dudes have one major difference: they're tiny. Clearly inspired by little gachapon toys, which is now the future with like every mobile video game ever. Gacha Force has you playing as little micro robots as you fly around blowing each other up. As opposed to Custom Robo's top-down view, Gacha puts you behind and directly in the action. It's very similar to Virtua On in the Gundam Versus series that has roots back in 2001 with Federation versus Xeon. It even uses the same point-based spawn system. Different from something like Armored Core, where you have to do a lot of manual aiming, Gacha Force has an arcadey feel that keeps the action going fast. It might be a bit easy, but that's okay. There's a ton of different Gacha Borgs to play as. There's literally over 200, so you can really tackle things any way you want to. It seems like Capcom wanted to make this into more of a multimedia project with kids' toys, but it never really took off in that manner. This game seems to have gone in one ear and out the other right out of the gate, to the point where the US copy of this is extremely rare. Again, thanks to whoever sent this to me, but it seems destined to remain that way. Weirdly, Capcom themselves reprinted copies in Japan in 2012, around the same time the Wii U was going to be released, but nothing would ever come out of that. The game itself, really fun, but simple. It uses a lock-on system so you can keep things rolling quickly, and while it starts off really easy, the enemies get more powerful as you go. The story mode is incredibly simplistic, where you just pick a point on the map and fight dudes endlessly for the entire campaign. But thankfully, it's got really good voice acting.
The day after a meteorite fell towards Safari Town, the little machine was also a life form known as a Gotchaborg from the planet Megaborg. Their fighting courage turns into GF energy. Let's do our best!
Let's battle! Let's have fun!
Gacha Force is an underrated gem, one of the coolest games in the console, and unfortunately, something that was not received well when it came out. I'm not sure what was in the water in the early 2000s, but critics sure hated video games back then. Sometimes you just want to blow stuff up with a little robot, and that's exactly what Capcom made. Anyways, Capcom and the GameCube, a pretty solid lineup. Go play Gacha Force, legally of course. It's not all rainbows, giant robots, and sunshine though, as Capcom also did a few licensed games, and you know we love us a few of those. So yeah, sure. Disney's hide and sneak. Excuse me. It turns out that Capcom and Disney would team up a bit longer than the 8 and 16-bit era. In the 2000s, they worked to bring us two GameCube exclusives, Disney's Hide and Sneak, as well as Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse. And, yeah. Whoever's idea it was to make two Mickey Mouse games, one of which was a point-and-click adventure and a cheap Metal Gear Solid knockoff, sure didn't think it through. There's a ton of licensed games from this era, and even a handful of exclusives to wade our way through. Most of them ranging from okay to oh my god, what were they thinking? For every Charlie's Angels or Batman insert subtitle here, we'd have a Star Wars Rogue Squadron, but those are fondly remembered and in some cases remade. I don't think anyone was expecting Battle for Bikini Bottom to get a remake. We've got Metabots Infinity, another small robot game, but this time based on an anime, one with an amazing walk cycle. Also in the anime category is Yu-Gi-Oh! Falsebound Kingdom, once again with the cards, but this time turning the creatures from duel monsters into a traditional RPG. It's one of those non-Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! games. I'll talk about it someday. The licensed game that may not necessarily be totally forgotten, but we all want to forget, however, is Universal Studios Theme Park Adventure, a launch window title with one of the worst box arts I've ever seen. You gotta love how the logos on the bottom right, and the biggest thing is a T-Rex head covering up the main logo that just says Univer. Who thought this was a good idea? The game itself is not what you would expect. Rather than being a game developed by a Western studio covering the Western theme park based on Western Hollywood films, it's a Japanese-made game. One made by Naya Digital Works, who have made nothing else, and published by Kimco, who frankly, I don't really understand. All I know is that if I'm browsing PSN, I know Kimco when I see it. So how about a video game set in Universal Studios Japan where the goal is to ride the rides? Except you can't, because the lines are too big. Yeah, it's a game about running around a theme park and being disappointed that you didn't queue 2 hours earlier in order to hop the line for Back to the Future. Of course, I can't play the game. Why would that make sense? However, you can hop into Waterworld at any time during the day as there's no line. I just hope you're ready to watch the impressive finish to the attraction from multiple angles. Yeah, that's a That's it. In order to ride the other rides, which are just mini games, you have to either get lucky or purchase a hat for the ride, which may as well just be the fast pass. You have to literally save up enough points by picking up garbage or correctly answering a bunch of trivia, mostly about Back to the Future 3 for some reason. And then you turn that into a stupid hat of a stupid shark eating your stupid head, and you hop into Jaws. A ride where your entire goal is to not die. Yeah, imagine going to Universal and being thrown into a life or death situation. Quick, throw the box at the shark so you don't die. Screw you, Jaws. Yeah, this game sucks. It's really self-serving and reminds me more of something you get in a Burger King kids meal. And that feels like I'm being too mean to Sneak King, because at least that wasn't sold at full price. There's just something really funny about seeing Backdraft and Waterworld in the same lineage as E.T. and Woody Woodpecker. The GameCube was a bit of an experimental phase for Nintendo, as they're a publisher who always kept their development close to the chest, but around this time they would start working with a lot of third-party developers, in particular a lot of Western ones. In some cases, popular franchises were taken on by these companies to mixed results, and while Star Fox Adventure is probably the first one that comes to mind, it wouldn't be the first. That'd be Wave Race Blue Storm, a launch title created by Nintendo Software Technology over in Washington. You'd think with it being a launch title that people would be all over this thing, but for some reason it seems like Wave Race as a franchise in general is washed up. Remember jet skis? It seems like we as a society are still recovering from that. It's like the further we get away from Waterworld, Baywatch, and that one Beach Boys music video, jet skis and sea-doos fade further from public perception, and that might be okay. But once upon a time, there were 3 Nintendo games made using these rad boys. Wave Race for the Game Boy, 64 for the 64, and Blue Storm. It's hard not to love this one. It's an extremely simple racing game, one that has you trying to learn how to do sharp turns with the analog stick, ride the waves without losing too much speed, and hanging out with dolphins and doing cool flips. What's not to love? It's crazy to me that despite being a launch title and even getting okay-ish sales, that A, no one talks about it, and B, there hasn't been a sequel or port. Only very recently did we see Wave Race 64 make its way to the Nintendo Switch Online, so there's hope, but I'm not counting on it. Pretty much all Wave Race fans feeling like the board commentator Easter egg right now.
The winds are like diamonds, kid. Very rare.
Same with 1080 Avalanche. Also developed by NST after a bit of dev troubles, 1080 Avalanche saw Nintendo's other extreme sports franchise given some love. It is quite simply a snowboarding video game. The 90s and 2000s had a lot of these with your snowboard kids, cool boarders, amped, and SSXs, but Nintendo's 1080 snowboarding remains in my head for one reason and one reason alone, and that's working my body. Unfortunately for the GameCube sequel, they decided to replace that with the dulcet tones of Finger 11. Great. The whole catch with this one was the avalanche levels, where you'd be racing against your snow-based Doom. It feels pretty good for what it is, even if the trick system is extremely simplistic, but there is the elephant in the room, known as SSX Tricky. Nothing against Avalanche, but Tricky and even SSX3 are just vastly superior snowboarding games in a market that can only really have like one of these at a time. Those games, and even Amped, are swimming in personality, and 1080 Avalanche just feels a little lackluster in that area. Although it's pretty funny when the announcer calls a mirror match.
Ricky Winterborn versus Ricky Winterborn?
I think 1080 Avalanche is going to be a game that hardcore Nintendo fans will remember having a good time with, but when the conversation of good snowboarding video games comes up, it tends to be forgotten. Nintendo's foreign first-party games didn't just do extreme sports, they also dabbled in other genres. Like, we've also got first-person shooters, third-person shooters, and a horror game that's so scary I still can't try it, with Eternal Darkness Sanity's Realm. Although I wouldn't call Eternal Darkness forgotten, seeing as how it's one of the most highly regarded GameCube titles ever. This thing scared the pants off of me as a kid just watching someone else play, so I never got into it myself. Heck, it was the first Nintendo published game to ever receive an M rating. But when the only better reviewed games on the console are like Metroid Prime, Resident Evil 4, some Zeldas, and Soul Calibur 2, you've got yourself a classic. Just probably never on a modern console, because Silicon Knights is long gone. Good old Too Human. What What about Geist? Geist was the second Nintendo published game to receive the M rating. Coming out in 2005, a year prior to the Wii, I honestly don't remember this thing being a thing. That might just be because I was sucked into World of Warcraft at the time, but it makes sense for it to be a bit forgotten considering you play as a ghost. Geist is reverse Luigi's Mansion. Instead of trying to suck up the ghosts, you are the ghost, and you get to roleplay the exorcist as you go around haunting things and scaring people. A great idea, actually a fantastic concept, but unfortunately a majority of the experience is a really crappy first-person shooter instead. It's janky and not very fun, and there's no slider to change my turning speed, so this is just what you gotta deal with. Initially I was confused as to why there was a mini-me running around in the bottom corner, but then I became a trash can and understood what was going on. This thing swaps between being a shooter and adventure game, and it's clearly better when you aren't doing the former. Geist was delayed multiple years to get a lot of fine-tuning, but even with that, it still runs poorly. Heck, it still has a lot of issues running on emulators. There's a lot of promise here, with visual effects showing a sign of something really unique, and well, the game lets me play as a rabbit. That's kind of cool. Back to guns. Shoot, gun. It's hard to imagine something like this being a first-party Nintendo game now, when Nintendo just doesn't make stuff like this anymore, but considering how hard it failed critically and presumably financially, it all makes sense. One more though, and we're headed to the UK. You know what entire franchise is super underrated? Famicom Wars, or as most of you probably know it, Advance Wars. Any Game Boy Advance owner from back then probably knows it, but Advance Wars was a super dope strategy RPG that's really held up. Although, the franchise is way older than that, with roots that go all the way back to the 80s with Famicom Wars. This series has passed hands multiple times, usually between Hudson Soft and Intelligent Systems of Fire Emblem fame, but not as strange as in 2005 when it would land in British developer Kuju Entertainment's yard. Rather than a sequel, they'd make Battalion Wars, a spin-off doing their own thing. And beyond a few sprites here and there, this thing is almost unrecognizable from what we played on the GBA. But not bad, far from it. Although there is something pretty funny about seeing a Nintendo logo in a game where it feels like I'm controlling a warthog. Battalion Wars is a third-person shooter version of the Advance Wars style, but one that ditches the cute and recognizable art style and characters and gives us this generic hoorah 90s cartoon aesthetic. Like, legit, the commander guy looks like the dude on the front of the General Chaos box. What about their personalities? War? Love it. Love war. The bite of that kind of story is off a bit when the characters are appealing to look at, but yeah. The gameplay itself is a shooty bang affair where you'll recruit a bunch of soldiers and take them into battle. It actually feels decent enough to play, and the strategic nature of things, while simple, works well enough. There's lots of vehicles to control, including planes. You can even assign units to be stationed in certain zones, which takes a page from its strategic brethren. Sure, it's very simple by comparison, and a lot of it comes down to wave defense, but it works better than you'd think. Despite looking the way that it does, I like it. Probably should have had some sort of multiplayer component, but yeah. It was successful enough to get a sequel at the time. 2 years later on the Wii, Battalion Wars 2, which was basically more of the same. And after that, there'd be one more Advance Wars game on the DS, and then complete radio silence on the franchise until recently with a reboot, which has unfortunately been delayed for very understandable reasons. The whole series is a bit quiet these days, but this one in particular seems to be forgotten in the good GameCube exclusives conversation. In the present, Nintendo rarely outsources their games to a Western studio, which, considering the reception of a lot of these I just talked about, makes sense, unless your name is Metroid for some reason. But you know I pine for the day we get another wave race. However, props to Battalion Wars for giving me a personal jump scare.
Incredible. I may have underestimated you, Colonel Austin.
So, one more game, just one more, and I'm sure we're all excited to see what I've come up with. Well, it's a little bit of everything we've gone over. A little absurd, a little first party in some regions, and definitely a little forgotten. I've never actually seen a copy of this in person, which is weird because I've seen that Elemental Gearbolt with the gun con in the briefcase, but I bet there's a few freaks out there who have played Cube of War: Survival of the Fittest. Also known as Dobutsu Bansho, originally translated as Animal Leader, a game that Nintendo refused to publish in the States, so Atlas did instead. Cube of War is one of the strangest games I've played on this channel, and that's saying something. One that is, get this, 93 megabytes. For reference, most everything in this video is at least 500. The concept is extremely simple, and I'm sure you've played something similar. Eat, You gotta eat stuff, vor, kill and eat. Like Evo, Tokyo Jungle, or those random mobile ads you see where you get bigger from eating stuff. But instead of eating to get bigger, you eat to become stronger and get more limbs, in this game called raw meat. You are quite literally what you eat in Cubivore, as whatever you chow down on gives you different powers, health values, and titles even. But eating's only gonna get you so far. You're playing as a scrumptious little graham cracker who has their eyes on one thing and one thing only: mating. Like, your little Cubivore guy's just always talking about how he wants to go to town. In between levels, he writes a post about feeling randy, and it's like I'm looking at Reddit. Although my poor little tummy wants to eat something yummy, it's tied up in knots because I've got the hots. With a female, I want to get chummy. Piggy eructio. Because I hit the wrong button. Then you eventually get to a cave where you, okay, how do I say this without getting in trouble? You buy the premium battle pass, become famous throughout the lands for your sick vor abilities, get a selection of mates, and then pick an offspring, each with a different limb style. You gradually grow in size in Cubivore using the powers of eating, mating, and raw meat. And just like in real life, you die right after. Dang. Okay, for real, this is dire. Homie finally got what he wanted and then died in a crumpled mess right outside his house. Cubivore is bizarre. It definitely looked and felt like it should have been a Nintendo 64 game, and well, it actually originally was. It started development as a 64 disc drive game, which explains a lot about everything. Gameplay-wise, it controls and feels okay, but the concept is enough of a hook to keep you engrossed the entire time. I mean, what other game looks and feels like this? The soundtrack is mostly a piano that goes off from time to time, which admittedly is a bit underwhelming considering that one of the designers in this also worked on Parappa the Rapper. This is one of those games that I wanted to get a physical copy of before talking about, but well, y'all know the story at this point. Cubivore isn't too terribly long, clocking in around 10 hours or so, but its weirdness is only really rivaled by something like Katamari Damacy. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite have the same staying power, and I mean, when you're up against Katamari, nothing really will. Considering Nintendo themselves didn't even want to publish this, I seriously doubt we'll ever see Cubivore again, and that's a huge shame. Of all the GameCube games out there, regardless of quality and whether or not we'll see a port down the line, Cubivore is definitely one that time might forget. Give it a shot if you like weird, janky games and a solid laugh at its inability to take itself seriously. And so we've come to the end once again, a bunch of weird and forgotten GameCube games. I am sick of saying the word game, and that's doubly hard when you're talking about this console, but I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm mostly stuck with exclusives this time around, but I know there's a ton of multiplots from the era that really deserve a shout out, and I'll get into those sometime soon. One of these days I'll sneak in some Ribbit King. Anyone up for some frolf? If you think there's anything that time's gonna be forgetting about, drop it in the comments below. Now, the GameCube library is actually kind of small in comparison to a lot of consoles out there, but you know, there's always a chance you'd turn the corner at a store and see something like, whoa, what is Beach Spikers? Anyways, I've been Austin, and catch me next time when, well, Halloween's around the corner, so maybe a Halloween video? I've never done that before. Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to A. Vox, Aaron Kwolek, Blackfoot Ferret, Chris Shelton, Christopher Oliva, Darren Newton, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nami Babs, Nick Irving, Ryan Talbert, and Shazan. Thank you very much for your generous support. Another video in the bag, forgotten GameCube game. Halloween special, let's do it. I don't know, spooky. Make sure to follow my social media, and also I released an album recently. I'm gonna do a little thing at the end of my next video to show a little more of that, but you can check that out. It's Great Hag, and I'll catch you guys next week. Have a good sleep. Think about cheese. Everyone likes cheese, right?